Joining us now, Congressman Dr. Dave Brat. He's an economist. He understands this. Represents the 7th District of Virginia. That's the Central Virginia area. He's a Republican. And he taught economics for better than 2 decades. And he's got a doctorate in economics. Dr. Brat, good to have you with us.
Hey, thanks for having me on, John.
You voted no. But, here's the good news. I know you're a fast reader because, you got a PhD and all of that. You're a pretty smart guy. And you were probably able to sit down there and read 2,250 pages in 9 hours. And you still voted no. Have you ever seen such a thing in your life, Dave?
Well, actually, the problem is I have. This is the icing on the cake. But John Boehner left the swamp over something just like this, where he had to go get Democrat votes. And the more Democrat votes you get, the worse the product becomes. And the people that are listening out there, I hope they pay attention. It is, for me, the people should be saying, Republicans got it wrong. That's right. But guess one of the reasons why we had to get it so wrong is because we needed 9 Democrat votes in the Senate and about 100 votes in the House. So then you got to give them about half the pie when we own the House and the Senate and the president. And so the Democrats get a free pass. The press never brings up the Democrats, right? They want increased spending on everything, and you just saw it. We blew it up by $400 billion, and the Democrats and the press were making noise about our $150 billion tax reduction when they were going to increase taxes by $10 trillion. So I've seen it before. It happens every year, right before Christmas, usually. This year was a little different budget cycle, and the Republicans promised we're going to all hang together. That was the promise from leadership. 218 votes, all Republicans. The Freedom Caucus compromised all year. Some of the stuff we didn't like, but we said it's worth it. If we get all Republican votes on this budget, it'll be sane. And now it wasn't. Leadership went over, got the Democrat votes. It's insane. And then the president signed it. I wish he would have vetoed it, but it's just the American people, the base is so upset right now. They're screaming. They're calling into my office like crazy. And hopefully energize conservatives and say, look, we're only going to elect people that make promises on fiscal responsibility that hold to their word. And I ran on those principles, and I'm trying to hold to those principles. And I'm about 100% on about every rating there is having to do with fiscal responsibility.
Don't you think the president could have vetoed this and said, look, this is going to hammer me in the legacy media. They're going to put clocks up and people can't go to the park and the White House visiting is closed and all the things they do, and veterans can't visit. They'll barricade it up. It's all the stuff they do. But what if he said, look, you elected me just to stop this stuff, and so I'm going to veto it because this is just a disaster. He probably could have done that, but the pressure on him in there. And the other thing, Congressman, he's surrounded by all these Republican operatives in there that have made their living in the swamp. And so this to them is like, well, we got the military spending, let alone another $400 billion of God knows what. 500, and they got more money for staff. They got more money for Planned Parenthood. What the heck is going on?
Yeah, well, you just nailed it, right? He was in a terrible position at the last minute. He needed to know how the budget process works 6 months ago and announce to people, if you do this, this, and this, right, draw red lines. And what are some of the red lines? You better have my wall in there or I will veto it, right? You better have the Goodlatte immigration bill in there in its entirety or I will veto it. You better not be funding Planned Parenthood, which uses taxpayer dollars to run ads against Republicans. That better not be in there, right? You better not be building walls in other countries until we build a wall in our country, right? So his advisors let him down the swamp trail, and at the last minute, it's very hard. And he might have vetoed. There might be enough votes to override the veto. And so you don't know how that would have played out because the swamp is that bad right now. And so, he should have vetoed it. He didn't get any of the White House priorities. The Republican priorities clearly aren't in there. So it's a terrible product. And the Freedom Caucus, I think we're going to start announcing up front and try to put out a new contract with America as to what those red lines should be way in advance and educate the American people because the Democrats get a total walk, right? They get to look like the good guys. We're in favor of funding every program under the sun. And the press never goes out and asks the Democrats, are you in favor of that giant spending bill? And the Democrat answer would be, well, yeah, I would like all the good parts, but I would trim the bad parts, right? I mean, you can't make it up. It's a comedy routine, and they get away with that because they own the press, while Republicans have to, hold the principle and do the heavy lifting and get out your pencils and do the math and try to save some money. And in the House budget, we did that. I was on the committee. We saved $200 billion on mandatory, and that got erased when the Senate got to it. So we're trying to do some good work, but it's the swamp is just arranged in a way, and the budget schedule is set up in a way that doesn't make it work. And I started to go on, but let me add one other point. In the budget a month ago, not the omnibus bill that we just voted on, that's the spending bills, the omni, but the budget bill, the Senate slid in there 400 pages in that we're not even going to do a budget this year. And so I mentioned that the other day on Fox Radio in the morning with Varney. And then Rush Limbaugh picked it up, and then Hannity picked it up, and then Laura Ingraham picked it up. And the reason this matters is because if you don't do a budget, you can't do reconciliation. And that means we can't pass anything this year with 51 votes in the House, in the Senate. And so that's how we passed tax reform. That's how we were going to get rid of Obamacare. So the Senate wants to act like they're good guys doing bipartisan stuff. They gave up our most powerful tool in the budget to get anything done. And the American people and President Trump can come back to that issue. That's why this matters. He ought to just shame the Senate for their lack of courage. They don't want to take a vote. They're hiding under their desks. And so he can come right back and say, okay, you led me down a terrible path on this budget. Let's get it straight right now.
Well, he asked for a line item veto. He's not going to get that, right? Because, see, a line item veto for the president, Congressman, would start draining the swamp. And so they're never going to do that because they want the money. Yep. So, I mean, look, Newt Gingrich tried to give a line item veto to Bill Clinton in, 95, and he couldn't get it done. So you had a Republican House trying to give a line item veto to a Democratic president, and it got voted down by everybody in his party and the Dems because they don't want to give up that power, right?
Right.
So that's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's like putting in a balanced budget amendment or anything or term limit. I put in both those bills. I promised I would do it. They both got 50 out of 450. So
forget it. I mean,
that tells the people out there, if your representative isn't voting for those things and signing onto those bills, you got a problem.
We're with Republican Congressman, 7th District, Virginia, Dave Brat. That is the Central Virginia area, the suburbs outside of Richmond, and he's a member of the Freedom Caucus. Congressman, the other point you brought up is to get rid of the filibuster rule in the Senate and get to 51 votes. You're not going to get that either, right?
No.
So you're not going to get a line item veto because, again, 60 votes or whatever their cloture rule is that they made up, they hide behind that. It's like hiding behind mommy's apron. They don't have to take votes. But again, if you get it, that's part of the power of the swamp, is you can't get anything done without everybody getting what they want. So why would they ever give up that power? They're not going to do that either.
No, they're not on that process, and that's why I brought up reconciliation. Because if we do a budget next year, you can do reconciliation and get the same outcome. You only need 51 votes, and we have them. We have 51 Republicans with the vice president voting with us. So we can do anything we want for until November, almost a full year. And we've given up that power unilaterally. And that's why Rush Limbaugh aired that thing out 3 times in a row. He's going to have me on, I think, tomorrow, to explain some of this stuff because it's buried in triplicate, right? That's the way this process is set up. So the American people can't follow it, and it's intentional. But we do have a tool left, and the president can come out swinging and say, look, U.S. Senate Republicans, I know you're hiding, and you're not going to hide. I'm going to name each one of you in public and see if you're for doing a budget next year. And the answer better be yes, because you just threw me under the bus with this terrible product, right? So let's get it going. So we do have a solution. It's a workable solution.
Explain. So this budget ends in fiscal year September 30th, right? It ends. So, I mean, it's 6 months. And, I mean, it's almost like you have to start the process now, right? You can't wait until
That's right.
You get back
right.
and you got to start the process now. So 2 questions. Explain what you mean when you say the tool is reconciliation that can get it to 51 in the Senate. Explain that in layman's terms so we all understand it.
Yeah, so you do a budget first, and that's usually just your kind of a cheerleading document as your vision and goals, but it does set the top line numbers. And then that leads into the spending bills, the 12 appropriations bills and the omnibus that we just signed. And so we have a spending bill that takes us 6 months out. But for all of next year, 2019, there's no budget, and the Senate and the House agreed we won't do a budget. And so you can always override current law, that it will extend, right? So right now there's no plan whatsoever to do a wall or to do the GODZILLA bill, which is way better than just the wall. It includes the wall, but it does everything else we should be doing, E-Verify and all the other pieces of immigration reform that have to be in place. And so you can put all of that into the budget document, and then you just ask for reconciliation instructions when you vote on the budget, and then all you need is 51 votes to make all of that happen. That's how we got tax through. And if you'll notice, the one thing the swamp did want, the big money folks, also wanted tax reform. And so you'll notice that there's no mystery around that, right? If the big money wants something, it happens. So they want tax reform, so do I, because it's good for everybody. It causes economic growth for the big, and the poorest of the poor pays zero tax now, up to $24,000. And so it's good for the rich, it's good for the poor, it's good for everybody in the middle, and it went through because the rich want it. But now the rest of the American priorities, right? The American people voted overwhelmingly to put this country back on a competitive track with the rest of the world, to fix immigration, to fix the schools, to fix just every other issue under the sun that we have to work on. I can't go through it all. And that's what we still can do that in this upcoming budget. And it's not too late.
It's unbelievable, is all I can say, how this thing went down. And, the fact that you got it with 9 hours, 2,200 pages, $1.3 trillion. 2 questions. Do we have any idea of what the deficit will be as it relates to the $1.3 trillion spending plan?
Yeah, it's going to be over $1 trillion per year, right? And so it's good you brought that up, because the entire budget is $4 trillion, and we ignore $3 trillion of it because that's the mandatory programs, Medicare, Social Security, and all that. That's 3/4 of the budget. And so the discretionary part, the part that has to do with the military and education and all running government, is $1 trillion, and we're deficit financing the entire thing. And so we're going to have over $1 trillion deficits. This is the first time the Republicans ever let that happen, right, for the next 10 years. And so another $10 trillion in debt at the end of 10 years. And the Democrats, of course, wanted more than that. And so we were trying to rein it down at least a little bit. The Democrats want the spigot wide open. And there's no end to what they want. They voted, and I don't know why our leadership hadn't brought it up. They voted, 107 Democrats in the Progressive Caucus voted to raise taxes $10 trillion. Right, let that sink in a minute. Voted to increase your taxes by $10 trillion, increase spending $11 trillion, and more debt and deficit than the Republican tax cut plan. That's pretty hard to do, but they pulled it off. And so I hope people are still paying attention, right? I know it's a tough day on Republicans, but everybody's got to keep their chin up.
So the one,
because the alternative is worse.
Congressman, the $1.3 trillion that was just passed, that was for the discretionary spending over and above the $3 trillion that is basically, you can't stop that. That's just entitlements and it just goes, right?
Yep.
So you spend $3 trillion just by opening up the doors and having a government. The other 1.3 is the discretionary. So the total budget then for the 12-month period becomes $4.3 trillion, right?
Yep, right.
And of that, we're only taking in revenues about $3.3 trillion. Is that accurate?
That's right. Right.
So that drives a $1 trillion deficit.
Yep.
And so when you say that'll go on for a 10-year period, why do you say that? Because you'll have a new budget, right? In 2019, some of that money could come down. So what makes you say that it would be $10 trillion?
Well, you just look at our performance and track record and the fact that the Democrats are there as a block every time. And so we used to be able to keep the 10-year window under $1 trillion deficit per year. And this is the first year we failed.
Got it.
And so it's not a good sign. And so if you just keep following the current trend line, right, going back 10 years or whatever,
right,
and keep at that rate of growth
right,
of government, that's where you end up. And on the mandatory side, we can do something about it, right? The average person knows the basic facts. These programs were set up when the average death age was 65. So that's when benefits kick in.
Right.
Right? So you pay up till that point, till 65, then the benefits kick in. But now the average person is living to 83 and more.
Right.
And modern medicine is getting better by the day.
Right.
So the irony of better medicine is that everyone lives longer. But if people are retiring at 65, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see you're bankrupt, and we're bankrupt.
Right. So if you do nothing, the debt is going to grow from $20 trillion, the national debt, to $30 trillion in a decade.
Yep, absolutely.
And it's unsustainable now. All right, final question. We got to go, but I've been asked this by a bunch of people, and the president sent a tweet out this morning that lends itself to this. Does the president, in the money spent now, have the authority to move it around? Like, can he say, I'm going to take $10 billion from this and put it towards the wall? Can he do that or not? I've heard conflicting evidence on that.
Yeah, I think you can, but it gets pretty in the weeds quick. So that there were rumors about you could take some of the money from the Army Corps of Engineers, $10 billion, and move it toward building a wall. But I think it has to go towards something, like way back in 2006, 2010, we had legislation on the wall. So it's got to go towards something that I think already is in existing law, right? You can't just spend it willy-nilly on anything you want. But there is a wall provision already in law. So you might be able to use some of that money to build that wall that's already been legislated. And I think that's the way it'll play out.
All right, we're out of time. Unbelievable, Congressman. I can't thank you enough for being with us and clearing all this up.
John.
And what a sad day. And thanks for standing tall. And you are the person in Congress who tells everybody what is going on. That's why you're so valuable. And my wife is right when she says that your re-election in 2018 is the most critical one that we have in the United States. And I agree with her. Thanks for being with us, Dave.
Yeah, no, thank you guys. And tell everybody, go out to DaveBrat.com if they want to support me a little bit. Every $10 matters. So thanks to everybody out there listening.
DaveBrat.com. If you got $50, $25, send them something, because we got to get this guy back, because no one else tells you like it is and tells you how the sausage is being made except for Dave. DaveBrat.com. Send them some money.